August 11th is a memorial for St. Clare, the St. Clare associated with St. Francis of Assisi. The story goes that at the age of 18, she heard Francis preach, and she became totally enwrapped in his sermons and what he was portraying as his spirituality. And of course, St. Francis started the Franciscan order, first order, and Clare eventually the second order, Franciscans, which are the poor Clares that we used to have here in the Diocese of Memphis until the community got so small that all the ladies were dying away and everything else like that. But she took that same charism of being poor, like St. Francis and everything else like that. And so she was a great saint. She also had a great love of the Blessed Sacrament. At least twice, her convent, her abbey, whatever that was actually called, monastery, whatever, was actually attacked by Muslims. And twice she appealed to the Blessed Sacrament and actually put the monstrance out, and it drove supposedly the Saracens away, and it saved her community. So she had a great reverence of the Blessed Sacrament, and that's something we can learn from her, okay? What's interesting to me in the regular readings for Tuesday of the 19th week of Ordinary Time, it comes from chapter 18 of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Now, there are 5 great sermons by Jesus in that Gospel. We usually refer to them as discourses. And Matthew did it that way because he was writing to Jewish Christians who knew that there were 5 books of Moses, right? The first 5 books of the Bible, the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so he had Jesus do his 5 books within a book, 5 great sermons. And this sermon that appears in chapter 18 has to do with conditions within the church in which there are people butting their heads, in which there's division. How do you deal with division within the church? And it seemed to me to be so appropriate with not only what's going on in our church, but also with what's going on in our country and the world, because there's this hatred and division and everything else. How are we going to get things settled so we're back to St. Francis's peace and St. Clare's peace and that kind of a thing? In today's gospel for this day, Jesus talks about a couple ways to deal with this. One is to have the attitude of a child. Now, he's not telling us to be childish. My 4 little girls that think I'm their grandfather was over yesterday, and of course they run havoc through my house when they're over. They come over with their parents for Mass at 4 o'clock on Sundays, and then and they're just 2 youngest one, they're always messing around during the Mass. And then when the Mass is over, they start tearing the whole place up, and I have to kind of go behind them and clean after they're there. But they really got into it yesterday because they found where I hid candy. And the 2-year-old kept coming back with little candy things for me to open up for her the whole time. So she was being childish. Jesus is not telling us to be childish. They're telling us to be childlike. And in that society, that meant that the child was totally dependent on the family. The boys and the girls grew up in the company of the mother and the extended females in the family. And they taught them from the beginning right and wrong, which is probably the reason why Jesus was so fond of his mother, isn't it? His mother probably taught him those Jewish prayers that she had learned as a kid, that kind of a thing. But he would have been totally dependent upon her. And we think about that in our lives today. The 2-year-old is now getting to the point where everything, she's the terrible 2. It's like, no, go away. No, don't want that. Do that. But up until then, she was totally dependent upon Mom and the rest of us who were adults to get them through the day. And that's what Jesus is telling us, that we need to be totally dependent on Him, to trust in Him, and that He can get us through all difficulties. And oh, by the way, if we should stray, at the end of this section from chapter 18, There's that parable of the stray sheep where the shepherd does something that we think is totally crazy. He leaves the 99 in the desert and goes after that one stray to bring the stray back home. And that's what Jesus does too. And that's what we got to do. We got to have the attitude and the mentality of Jesus and be compassionate and loving and understanding. And when our brother or sister strays, do all we can to help bring them back to the fold.